Maya never thought her day would turn so dark. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day where the sun felt warm but not too hot. And the wind carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery near her school. She walked home slowly, her headphones in her ears, nodding to the rhythm of her favorite song. Her school bag felt heavy, but her heart felt light. She was already thinking about the snacks waiting at home, about maybe watching her favorite show, or calling her best friend to gossip about what happened in class. For her life at that moment was peaceful and normal. It's the way it should be for a girl her age. But peace can break in seconds. She noticed a police car pulling up ahead. At first, she thought nothing of it. Cops drove around all the time, and she was used to seeing them. She kept walking, not even looking their way. Then the car slowed down. The siren didn't flash and the lights didn't blink, but the vehicle rolled to a stop right beside her. Two uniformed officers stepped out. Their heavy boots hitting the pavement with a sound that made Maya's stomach twist. "Hey you!" One of them called out sharply. Maya pulled out her headphones, confused. "Me?" she asked, pointing at herself. "Yeah, you. Come here," the taller officer ordered. Her feet froze. She had no idea what they wanted. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had never even been in trouble before. She was the type of girl who stayed out of fights, who always got good grades, who respected people. But something in their eyes told her this wasn't a friendly stop. She took a small step toward them. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "You match the description," the shorter one said, already looking her up and down like she was guilty. "Description of what?" Maya frowned, but before she could get an answer, the taller officer walked closer, too close, and pointed at her bag. "Open it," he demanded. Maya hesitated. People on the street had started to slow down, watching. She felt dozens of eyes on her, strangers pausing to see what would happen. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to shout that she had done nothing wrong, but her voice got stuck in her throat. "I'm just coming from school," she managed to say. "My bag has only books." "Then you won't mind showing us," the officer replied with a smirk. He grabbed the strap of her bag before she could stop him. Maya's hands tightened around the other side of it, pulling back. She didn't want him to touch her things. Not like that. Not without reason. The cop's grip grew harder. "Don't resist," he snapped. "I'm not resisting," Maya said quickly. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like the whole street could hear it. The other officer stepped in now, circling around her, blocking her path. She felt trapped, like a small bird surrounded by two cats. Her mind raced what was happening. Why her? "Spread your arms," the tall one ordered. "What?" "No, please. I didn't do anything," before she could finish. He spun her around and pushed her against the police car. The cold metal pressed into her chest. Gasps came from the crowd gathering nearby. Phones came out, recording the scene. Maya's eyes stung with tears, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of humiliation. "I told you, I'm innocent," she cried, her voice breaking. The cop ignored her. "Always the same excuses," he muttered. "Think we're stupid." Maya's breathing turned fast and shallow. Her mind shouted at her to stay calm, to not let them see her break. But deep down, she felt the storm rising inside. Her father's words echoed in her memory. "Always stand tall, Maya. Never let anyone make you feel small." She clenched her fists. Her father wasn't just any man. But the cops didn't know that. To them, she was just another girl on the street, someone they thought they could push around without consequence. The officer searching her bag threw her notebooks on the hood of the car, flipping through pages carelessly, tearing some of them. In the process, "Nothing here," he grunted. "Of course, there's nothing," Maya said, her voice shaking but louder now. The shorter officer leaned close, his eyes mocking. "Careful how you talk to us. We can make your life very hard." At that moment, Maya felt a fire spark inside her. Fear was still there, yes, but anger was rising fast. She was not going to let them treat her like this. She took a shaky breath and turned her head slightly. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. The taller cop laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Mistake? You think you're special or something?" Maya looked straight ahead, her eyes wet but fierce. She didn't answer. Not yet. But deep in her chest, she carried a secret that would soon turn their arrogance into regret. Because the man who raised her was not someone to be mocked. Not someone to be disrespected. And if her father found out what they were doing to his daughter right now, the entire street would know why he was called the most feared commander of Delta Force. The ordinary day had just turned into a nightmare. But the nightmare wasn't for Maya. It was for the men who thought they could break her. Maya's heart was racing faster than ever. Her face was pressed against the cold police car, her cheek brushing against the hard surface while strangers stood around, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered, some pointed, and many held up their phones, recording every second. She could hear the clicks of cameras, the quiet murmurs of the crowd, and the sharp sound of the officer's boots on the pavement. The taller cop pushed her shoulder harder, keeping her pinned. "Stop moving," he barked, though she wasn't moving at all. His voice was filled with irritation, as if her very presence was an insult. The shorter one picked up her notebooks again, shaking them as though he expected drugs or weapons to fall out. Torn pages floated down onto the street, carried by the wind. A child in the crowd bent down and picked one up, holding it to his chest as if it were something sacred. Maya noticed, and her stomach twisted with shame. Those were her notes, her hard work, her school dreams scattered and treated like trash. "I told you." Maya said, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong." The officer closest to her let out a laugh, cruel and loud. "Yeah, that's what they all say. You kids always think you're innocent. I am innocent." Maya cried, louder this time. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, silence swept. Across the crowd, people exchanged glances, their eyes full of pity. But no one dared step forward. The shorter cop stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Listen, girl, we don't care if you cry. We don't care what story you tell. To us, you're just another mouth to shut." His breath was hot and heavy, and his words stung like poison. Maya's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to do something. But her father's voice echoed in her mind against a calm. "Maya, don't fight with emotion. Wait for the right moment." The taller officer suddenly pulled her back and spun her around to face the crowd. His grip on her arm was rough, his fingers digging into her skin. He wanted everyone to see her humiliation, to see her broken. "Look here," he said to the people filming. "This is what happens when you mess with the law. You see this? You think she's innocent? She matches the description. That's all we need." Maya felt her knees weaken, but she refused to bow her head. Her father taught her something else. Tooth. The moment you lower your eyes, they win. So she stood tall, even with tears on her cheeks, even with anger burning in her chest. "You're wrong," she said quietly, but firmly. "I'm not who you think I am." The shorter cop smirked. "Oh, really? Then who are you? Some princess? Some senator's kid?" He sneered and shoved her bag onto the ground, its contents spilling everywhere. Pens, papers, a small photo of her family. The picture slid across the pavement. Landing near the crowd, the child who had picked up her notebook earlier now picked up the photo, holding it gently as if it were glass. He looked at the image of a strong man in uniform, standing proudly with his daughter. He didn't know who the man was, but something in the way he carried himself in the picture made the boy pause. He brought it closer to Maya and whispered, "Is this your dad?" Maya nodded, biting her lip. She wanted to say his name, but she knew better than to reveal too much here. In front of everyone, the taller cop noticed the photo and snatched it. From the boy's hand, he studied it and laughed. "What is this? Some army guy? You trying to scare us with your daddy's picture?" He waved it in the air, showing it to the crowd. "Look at this, she thinks her daddy is some kind of hero." Maya's anger finally broke through her fear. She lifted her chin and stared him straight in the eye. Her voice, though shaky, carried enough force to silence the whispers around. "Them, he's not just some army guy. You're making a mistake. A big one." The officer raised his eyebrows, amused. "Oh, and what's Daddy gonna do? March down here and save his little princess." He shoved the photo into his pocket, grinning as if he had one. But Maya wasn't shaking anymore. Something inside her shifted. Her humiliation was still raw, but now it was coated with a layer of strength she didn't even know she had. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The fear in her chest began to transform into something sharper resolve. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she whispered. The shorter cop leaned in, mocking her again. "Then tell us, sweetheart, who are we dealing with?" Maya's lips parted, but before she could answer, a murmur ran through the crowd. People began pointing, whispering louder now. A bystander who had been filming suddenly shouted, "I know. That man in the photo. That's Colonel Harass, the Delta Force commander." The word spread like wildfire through the crowd, bouncing from one person to the next, till the entire street buzzed with it. The taller officer froze for a fraction of a second. His grip on Maya loosened, though he quickly tightened it again, trying to cover his slip. The shorter one laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Delta Force, please. That's just a story. Don't believe everything you see on TV." But Maya's eyes gleamed now. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a spark of power returning to her. She looked at the officer holding her and spoke slowly, each word cutting the silence like a blade. "Call my father." Right now, the taller officer stiffened, his jaw tightening. The shorter one chuckled, but his eyes betrayed unease. They didn't know whether to laugh or take her seriously. But one thing was certain, the girl they thought they could bully. So Isley was no longer trembling, and somewhere, miles away, a man whose name was feared across continents was about to hear what had happened to his daughter. Asterisk. The crowd had grown larger now. Dozens of people stood on the sidewalk, whispering, pointing, and recording with their phones. Cars slowed down just to see what was happening. The tension in the air was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Maya stood tall, her wrists still, aching from the officer's grip. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her eyes had hardened. No longer weak, no longer humiliated, she was ready. "Call my father," she said, her voice calm but sharp, cutting through the noise of the street. The taller officer blinked at her, stunned for a second. Then he barked out a laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, here we go again. Daddy's coming to save the princess." "Sweetheart, that's not how the world works." Maya didn't flinch. "It is when your father is Colonel Harass." The shorter officer frowned. The name hit his ear strangely, like a sound he had heard before but couldn't quite place. He squinted at her. "Colonel who?" "Colonel Harass," Maya repeated, louder this time, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with power. "Delta Force commander." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Murmurs grew louder, some people gasping as if they recognized the name. Others looked confused, but intrigued. Someone in the back shouted, "She's telling the truth." "That's him." The taller officer scoffed, trying to hide his unease. "Delta Force, please. That's Hollywood nonsense." Is this a movie? He forced a laugh, but his hand twitched nervously at his belt. Maya locked her gaze on him. If you don't believe me, then call him. Right now. You'll see for yourself. The shorter cop stepped closer, his tone mocking, but his eyes cautious. And what's he going to do if we call him? Come running with his little army. Maya leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. If my father finds out what you've done to me today, you won't just lose your jobs, you'll never sleep peacefully again. The officer's smirk faded. For the first time since this began, doubt flickered across his face. The taller one tried to regain control. He yanked Maya's arm. Enough of this. You think you can scare us with some bedtime story about soldiers? You're just a kid. And kids lie, but Maya wasn't backing down. She raised her chin higher, her voice growing strong enough for the entire street to hear. I'm not lying. My father is the most feared commander in Delta Force history. You don't scare me. You should be scared of him. The crowd gasped again. Phones zoomed in on her face, on the officers, on every second of this confrontation. The internet was going to explode with this footage, though the officers were too blinded by pride to realize it yet. Finally, the shorter cop sighed, rolling his eyes. Fine, you want us to call Daddy? Let's call him. He reached for his phone, smirking as though he was still in control. What's the number, princess? Maya's lips curved into the smallest, coldest smile. She gave the number without hesitation. The shorter cop typed it in, still convinced this was all a bluff. But then he pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then the line clicked. A deep voice came through. Steady and powerful. Colonel Harass. The shorter cop straightened up unconsciously, the weight of the man's tone already pressing down on him. Ah, this is Officer Daniels. I have your daughter here with me. There was silence on the other end. Heavy, chilling silence. Then the voice returned, sharper than a blade. Put Maya on the phone. Now? The officer swallowed hard. His throat bobbed as he handed the phone to Maya, his cocky smirk completely gone. She took it, her hands still, trembling, but her voice steady as she spoke. Daddy, she whispered, her eyes filling again. They stopped me. They pushed me against a car. They searched my bag. They tore my notebooks. Daddy, they didn't believe me. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. The kind of silence that promised thunder. Give the phone back to the officer, Colonel Harass said finally. His tone was calm. To calm. The kind of calm that made people shiver. Maya handed the phone back. The taller officer grabbed it this time, still trying to act tough. Look, Colonel, with all due respect. Harass's voice boomed through the tiny speaker, making even bystanders flinch. You dare touch my daughter. You dare humiliate her in front of a crowd. His tone dropped to a growl. Do you even know who you are speaking to right now? The officer's face turned pale. Sweat dotted his forehead. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You will stand there, Harass continued, his voice like thunder rolling across a battlefield. And you will not lay another hand on her. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. The officer stammered, his arrogance cracking like glass. Harass's next words were quiet, but they cut deeper than any scream. Good, because my men are already on their way. The officer froze. His hand trembled around the phone. Your men. Yes, Harass said coldly. And they move faster than you can imagine. The line went dead. The phone slipped from the officer's hand, clattering onto the pavement. The taller cop tried to laugh it off, but his voice shook. He's bluffing. Soldiers aren't coming. This is crazy. But Maya knew better. Her father never bluffed. When he said his men were coming, it meant the ground itself would shake. With their arrival, she looked at the officers, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and triumph. "I told you," she said softly, "you've made the biggest mistake of your lives." And the sound of engines roaring in the distance proved her right. The street was buzzing with whispers. The crowd had doubled in size, phones raised high, like glowing eyes, capturing every second. The officers stood stiff, their arrogance melting into unease. The faint sound of engines approaching from a distance sent a chill through the evening air, but no one dared to move. Everyone was waiting. The taller cop bent down, picked up his phone from the ground, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He glanced at his partner nervously. "He's bluffing," he muttered. "Soldiers aren't coming. It's just a scare tactic." But his voice lacked conviction. Even he didn't believe his own words. Maya, standing between them, wasn't afraid anymore. Her tears had dried, leaving behind eyes that burned with determination. She knew her father. She knew his tone. When Colonel Harass spoke like that, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The phone buzzed in the officer's hand. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Colonel Harass calling back. He answered with shaking hands. "Hello." The voice that came through was steady, calm, and heavy with power. "Officer, this is Colonel Harass." "Yes." "Yes, sir," the cop stammered. His arrogance now completely gone. "You are holding my daughter against her will," Harass continued, his tone low but cutting like steel. "You humiliated her. You laid hands on her. And now the world is watching. The officer's eyes flickered to the crowd. Dozens of phones were pointed directly at him. Live streams were running. People were commenting. The internet was swallowing every second of this drama. "I didn't know she was your daughter," the officer said quickly, his voice cracking. "That's the problem," Harass said coldly. "You think you can bully anyone just because. You wear a uniform. You think power belongs to you. But power belongs to those who protect, not those who destroy." The cop swallowed hard. His throat was dry, but Harass wasn't done. "Now listen carefully," Harass said, his tone dropping to a growl. "You will not touch her again. You will not raise your voice at her. You will stand there quietly with your partner until I arrive. You're coming here." The officer whispered, his hands trembling. "Yes," Harass replied, "and I will not be alone." The officer's heart nearly stopped. He turned to his partner, whispering, "He's serious. He's actually coming." The shorter officer tried to steady himself, though fear was written all over his face. "What do we do? We can't just leave. Everyone's recording. If we run, we're finished. And if we stay, we're finished," the taller one hissed. On the phone, Harass's voice broke through again, commanding and final. "You have 5 minutes. My men are already on the ground. You won't see them until they want you to." The officer's blood ran cold. He looked around quickly, scanning the rooftops, the alleys, the cars parked nearby. He couldn't see anyone. But the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on him. "Sir, please." The cop tried to speak, but Harass cut him off sharply. "Don't beg me. Apologize to her. Right now. And do it properly." The taller cop turned slowly to face Maya. His lips parted, but no words came out. His pride was still fighting him, clawing at his throat. "Do it," Harass ordered, his voice echoing through the phone like a command given on the battlefield. The officer's shoulders slumped. He lowered his gaze. I'm sorry," he muttered. "Louder," Harass demanded. The officer flinched, then raised his voice for the entire crowd to hear. "I'm sorry for how we treated you." The shorter officer followed, his voice trembling. We made a mistake." The crowd erupted in whispers, gasps, even a few cheers. Phones captured every word. The image of two police officers apologizing to a teenage girl was powerful, humiliating for them, empowering for her. But Harass wasn't satisfied yet. "Now," he said slowly, "put the phone on speaker." The officer obeyed, his hand shaking as he tapped the screen. Harass's voice filled the street, every word sharp, heavy, and unforgettable. "To the people standing there, thank you for watching. Thank you for recording. You are witnesses to what abuse of power looks like. These men thought they could harass my daughter because she is young, because she is black, because they believed no one would protect her. But she is not alone, and neither are any of you." The crowd went silent, every face focused, every phone capturing history. "My name is Colonel Harass," the voice continued, calm but fierce. "Delta Force Commander. I have faced enemies in deserts, jungles, and mountains. I have seen men with guns tremble before justice. And tonight, you are all seeing what justice looks like. It starts here, with these men being held accountable." The taller officer's knees nearly buckled. The shorter one wiped sweat from his forehead, his face pale. They had thought they were in control, but now they were prisoners of the moment. Caught in a web they couldn't escape. "You two officers," Harass said sharply, "look at my daughter. Look her in the eyes. And remember her face, because it will haunt you. You will remember her strength, her courage, and her dignity, long after your badges are gone." Maya's lips parted in shock. She had never heard her father speak like this, not to her, not to anyone. His words wrapped around her like armor, lifting the heavy weight from her chest. The taller cop finally looked at her. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Shame burned on his face, brighter than any anger. And then, in the distance, black SUVs began rolling down the street, their engines growling like thunder. The crowd gasped, stepping back, clearing the road. The vehicles stopped with military precision, doors opening in perfect sync. Men in black tactical gear stepped out, their boots striking the pavement in unison. Helmets, weapons, night vision goggles, they were shadows turned solid, the kind of soldiers people only saw in movies. The crowd erupted, some in awe, others in fear. Phones shook as people tried to capture everything, and then, the last SUV door opened. Colonel Harass stepped out. The crowd fell silent, as though the air itself was holding its breath. His figure was tall, commanding, his presence radiating authority. His eyes locked on the two officers, and in that moment, they looked smaller than children. He had arrived, and the real confrontation was about to begin. Asterix engines rumbled like thunder, echoing off the buildings as the black SUVs lined up with perfect precision. The sound alone was enough to silence the street. No one in the crowd moved. No one even breathed too loudly. Every pair of eyes was locked on the vehicles as their doors opened at the exact same time, as if choreographed. Out stepped the shadows. Men, dressed in black tactical gear, their movements sharp and calculated. Helmets covered their heads. Night vision goggles rested on their helmets like watchful eyes. Their uniforms bore no flashy signs or markings, but everyone knew they were not ordinary soldiers. These were elite. These were men trained for silence, for power, for missions that never made the news. They moved without a word. No shouting. No wasted energy. Their boots hit the pavement in a rhythm that felt like a war drum. Each step closer made the two officers shrink further, their bravado crumbling. Sweat dripped down their temples as the reality of what was happening sank in. The crowd was frozen in awe. Phones shook in trembling hands, live streams blowing up with comments flying across screens. Who are they? Is this real? Delta Force? Oh my God, this is insane. The soldiers fanned out like a storm cloud, surrounding the scene with frightening ease. Some took positions on the edges of the crowd, watching silently. Others scanned rooftops and alleyways, their weapons ready, though not raised. The air grew heavier with every passing second, as though the entire block had been locked under an invisible shield of control. The taller officer whispered to his partner, his voice trembling, We need to get out of here." His partner shook his head quickly, panic in his eyes. "We can't. Everyone's filming. If we run, we'll look guilty. If we stay, God help us." But it was too late for escape. The last SUV door opened, and the sound of one boot hitting the ground silenced even the whispers. Colonel Harass stepped out. The crowd collectively gasped. He wasn't dressed in flashy medals or a polished uniform. He wore simple black fatigues, his posture straight, his presence commanding. His face was stern, weathered by years of battles fought in silence. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, carried the weight of a man who had stared into war and walked back alive when he walked forward. The soldiers adjusted ever so slightly. Their formation tightening around him without a word. This was their commander, their leader, their shadow in the dark. Colonel Harass didn't rush. He didn't need to. Each slow step he took toward the officers was like a hammer striking an invisible drum. The taller cop's knees nearly gave way, while the shorter one wiped his face. Pale as a ghost, Maya's heart leaped into her throat. For the first time that day, she felt safe. Her father was here. Not just her father, the man feared across countenance, the commander whose name carried stories whispered in enemy camps. But to her, he wasn't just the soldier. He was the man who tucked her in at night when she was little, who taught her how to stand tall, who told her never to let fear own her. And now, he was here for her. The colonel stopped just a few feet away from the two officers. His soldiers closed the circle, cutting off any possible escape. The entire street was locked down, though no one had given the order. It was instinct, discipline proof of why these men were the best. Harass's voice broke the silence. Deep, cold, controlled. "Which one of you touched my daughter?" The taller officer opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat worked, his lips trembled, but sound refused to escape. The shorter one tried to speak, stuttering, "Sir, it was just a misunderstanding." Harass raised a single hand, and the man froze instantly. Even without shouting, his authority slammed down like iron. "I did not ask for excuses. I asked a question." The taller officer swallowed hard. I did," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Harass stepped closer, his eyes locked onto the man like a predator sizing up prey. The officer felt his legs weaken, the crowd watching his humiliation. The soldiers staring at him without a flicker of emotion. "You shoved her against a car," Harass said, his voice low, each word deliberate. "You searched her bag? You humiliated her in front of strangers. Is that correct?" The officer stuttered. I didn't know. You didn't know." Harass's tone cut through him like a blade. "You didn't know she was my daughter? You think that changes what you did? Would it have been acceptable if she wasn't my daughter? If she was just another young black girl walking home from school? Tell me." The officer's lips trembled. No answer came. The crowd was silent. Phones captured everything. The internet would never forget these words. Harass turned his gaze to the shorter officer. "And you? Did you search her? Did you laugh at her?" The shorter man shook his head. Frantically, I just followed orders. Orders. Harass's eyes narrowed. Whose orders? To harass innocent children. To tear apart notebooks like they were trash. Orders to shame my daughter in front of the world. The man's knees buckled. He nearly fell, catching himself against the Maya stood a few steps behind her father, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes wide. She had never seen him like this, not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a father, unleashing the full weight of his power to protect her. The crowd began to murmur again, voices filled with awe. He's right. They messed with the wrong girl. This is unbelievable. The taller officer finally whispered, his voice breaking, "Please, we're sorry." Harris's jaw tightened. He took another step forward, so close the officer could feel the commander's breath. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried like thunder. "You're not sorry yet, but you will be." Behind him, the soldiers shifted slightly, their eyes trained, their bodies ready. The circle tightened. The air was electric, charged with the weight of justice about to fall. And in that moment, everyone watching knew this was no longer just about Maya. This was about every person who had ever been bullied, humiliated, or silenced by those who abused their power. The shadows had arrived, and the reckoning was only beginning. The air was still, but it felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. The crowd stood frozen in silence, their phones trembling in their hands as they recorded. No one dared speak too loudly, no one dared step forward. All eyes were fixed on one man, Colonel Harris. He stood tall in the center of the circle, surrounded by his soldiers, his presence commanding more fear than 100 raised guns. "I know." His gaze never left the two officers who had dared to lay hands on his daughter. It was not the look of a man angry at, was the look of a man who had already judged them and was deciding how far their punishment should go. The taller officer tried to stand straighter, his pride battling against his fear, but his knees betrayed him. They wobbled with every breath, his chest rising and falling like he was drowning. The shorter officer had already lost his composure, his face pale, his lips trembling as though every word he wanted to say turned to ash before leaving his mouth. Colonel Harris took one step forward. The sound of his boots striking the ground echoed louder than any siren. "Do you know who I am?" His voice was low, steady, but it carried through the street as if it had been amplified by the very air. The taller officer opened his mouth. "Why, yes, sir. Then you should know what it means when I ask you a question." Harris's tone sharpened like steel. "And you will answer it directly." "Yes, sir," the officer whispered. Harris's eyes narrowed. "Why did you put your hands on my daughter?" The taller cop swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. She matched the description, sir. We thought she was stop." Harris's voice boomed like thunder, and the man flinched, as though struck. "Don't lie to me. Don't insult me with excuses." His jaw tightened. "You didn't see a suspect. You saw a target. A young girl walking home from school, harmless, innocent, but you saw someone you could control. Someone you thought was powerless." The officer's lips trembled. His silence was louder than any confession. Colonel Harris turned his gaze to the shorter one. His eyes were sharp enough to pierce through armor. "And you? Did you search her bag?" The man nodded weakly. "Why, yes, sir, but you ripped her notebooks." Harris's voice cracked through him like a whip. "You mocked her. You tried to break her dignity." He took another step closer, the crowd pressing back instinctively as the tension grew unbearable. "Tell me, did it make you feel strong? Did it make you feel like a man?" The shorter officer shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I was just following orders." Harris cut him off again, his voice dripping with venom. "I've led men into war zones across the world. I've given orders that saved lives, orders that ended battles. Do you dare look me in the eye and use that word as an excuse for cruelty?" The shorter officer's eyes filled with tears. He looked down at the pavement, ashamed, unable to face the commander. The crowd stirred, their murmurs growing louder. He's right. They can't hide now. This is justice. Maya stood behind her father, her fists clenched at her sides. Every word he spoke lifted the weight from her chest. The humiliation she felt earlier was being burned away. By the fire of his voice, she wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't powerless. Her father's shadow stretched across the entire street and through it. She stood tall, too. Harass paced slowly in front of the officers, his eyes never leaving them. His soldiers didn't move, didn't speak, but their very presence was a silent wall of force. The officers looked like cornered prey, and Harass was the predator circling them. You see these men around me? Harass gestured to his soldiers. They have fought in silence, in places you cannot imagine. They have seen death up close. They know fear, but they do not bow to it. And do you know why they follow me? Neither officer answered. Because I lead with honor, Harass continued, his voice fierce. Because I protect the innocent. Because when I give an order, it is to defend those who cannot defend themselves. That is power. That is what your uniform should have stood for. But you. His eyes burned into theirs. You used it as a weapon against a child. The taller officer's chest collapsed inward, as though every word crushed him further. Harass stopped pacing and stood directly in front of them. He leaned in just enough for them to feel the weight of his presence. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like a blade across the crowd. You tried to scare my daughter. His eyes narrowed, cold as stone. Now it is your turn to be afraid. The taller officer's breath came out in short gasps. The shorter one clutched his cap tightly, his knuckles white. Harass stepped back finally, giving them a moment to breathe. But the reprieve was worse, stretched the silence into agony. Every second felt like a countdown to something they couldn't see. Then Harass spoke again, his voice steady, commanding. Kneel. The officers froze. You want forgiveness, Harass said, his voice firm. You want to prove you understand the weight of your actions? Kneel before the girl you humiliated. Kneel before the people you disgraced. The crowd gasped, phones shaking as they zoomed in. The taller officer shook his head, whispering, I can't. Harass's eyes narrowed. Then you don't deserve your badge. You don't deserve the uniform you wear. And by the time I'm done here, you won't have it anymore. The shorter officer's legs gave way first. He dropped to his knees on the pavement, his face lowered in shame. The taller one resisted, pride holding on like a dying flame. But the weight of Harass's gaze was too heavy. His knees finally buckled, and he collapsed beside his partner. Kneeling in front of Maya, the crowd erupted, gasps and shouts filling the street. The officers, once so arrogant and cruel, now bowed like broken men under the weight of justice. Colonel Harass's voice cut through the noise one last time, cold and final. This is only the beginning. The confrontation had ended. But the lesson had only just begun. The two officers knelt on the hard pavement, heads lowered, their pride shattered. Just minutes earlier, they had stood tall, mocking and humiliating Maya. Now, with hundreds of eyes watching, with cameras recording. Every second, they looked like broken men stripped of all authority. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the hum of the soldiers' steady breathing as they stood guard. Colonel Harass stood in front of them, his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence was heavier than any shout. When he finally spoke, his words cut like steel. Look up. The taller officer hesitated, his jaw tight with shame, but Harass's command was not one to be ignored. Slowly, he lifted his head. The shorter officer followed, his eyes red, his face pale. Do you see her? Harass asked, pointing to Maya, who stood a few steps behind him. Look at her face. The officer's eyes flickered toward Maya. She stared back, her body trembling, but not from fear. For the first time that day, she felt power flow through her, not the cruel power the officers had abused, but the power of truth, of justice, standing tall, even when others tried to break her. That is the girl you shoved against a car. Harass continued, his voice sharp and clear. That is the girl whose notebooks you tore apart, whose dignity you tried to strip away. Do you see her now? She is not broken. She is stronger than you will ever be. And her strength is why you are kneeling. The taller officer's lips parted, but no sound came. His throat was dry, his pride crushed into dust. Harass stepped closer, his boots echoing on the pavement. He turned, his voice now raised so the crowd could hear every word. You see these men? He said, pointing to the kneeling officers. This is what happens when those given power forget what it means to serve. They thought the uniform gave them the right to intimidate, to bully, to abuse. But the uniform means nothing without honor. Without justice, it is nothing but cloth. The crowd murmured, their voices filled with agreement. Some clapped softly, others nodded, their phones capturing his every word. Harass turned back to the officers. You wear that badge to protect, to defend, to stand between the innocent and danger. But tonight, you were the danger. You became. What you swore to fight against, his tone dropped, heavy with fury held in control. That is not law. That is corruption. The shorter officer's eyes brimmed with tears. He tried to speak, but Harass cut him off with a raised hand. No, Harass said firmly. You will not speak. You will listen. And you will remember. He turned his gaze back to the crowd. His voice carried the weight of every battlefield he had ever commanded. Power is not about how loud you can shout or how much fear you can cause. True power is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. True power is respect earned, not demanded. Maya felt tears welling in her eyes again, but these were not tears of fear. They were tears of pride. Her father's words wrapped around her like armor, lifting the shame that had weighed her down. Colonel Harass faced the officers once more. You will apologize to her, not to me, to her. The taller officer hesitated, his pride clawing at him, but Harass's soldiers shifted slightly, their silent presence reminding him he had no choice. He looked at Maya, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. I should never have touched you. I should never have treated you that way. The shorter officer followed quickly, his head bowed. I'm sorry too. I humiliated you. I shouldn't. Have the crowd erupted, some gasping, some cheering, others whispering in disbelief. They had never seen officers brought so low, never seen such accountability forced in front of their eyes. But Harass wasn't finished.
Stand, he ordered. The officers scrambled to their feet, their hands twitching nervously at their sides. Harass pointed to the crowd. Now apologize to them, every single person here, because you did not just shame my daughter, you shamed this community. You shamed your badge. The taller officer swallowed hard, his voice shaking. We're sorry. To all of you. For what we did. The shorter one followed, his words broken. We abused our power, and we will accept the consequences. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming. Cheers erupted, chants rising into the night. Justice, justice, justice. The sound echoed down the street, filling the air with a sense of triumph. Colonel Harass raised his hand and the noise died down. His voice grew softer, but every ear strained to hear. Remember this moment, he said, his eyes sweeping over the officers, the crowd, and finally resting on Maya. Because it is not just about my daughter. It is about every person who has been silenced, every voice that has been ignored. Tonight, the silence broke. Tonight, the world saw what justice looks like. He paused, his jaw tight, his voice lowering to a near growl. And if anyone dares forget, I will remind them. The soldiers behind him stood like statues, their presence a living reminder of the power that backed his words. The two officers stood trembling, knowing their careers, their reputations, their very lives had been forever changed. Maya stepped forward now, her voice small but steady. "Daddy?" Harass turned to her, his fierce eyes softening for the first time. "Yes." "Maya, can we go home now?" The crowd fell silent again, watching this fragile moment of father and daughter. Harass gave a small nod, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart, we can go home." But as he turned back one last time to face the officers, his eyes hardened once more. "This isn't over," he said quietly, a promise more than a threat. "The lesson has only begun." And with that, he walked his daughter toward the waiting SUVs, his soldiers closing in around them like an unbreakable shield. The officers were left standing in the middle of the street, broken men under the harsh light of justice while the echoes of the crowd's cheers rang in their ears. The night sky stretched above the city, but the street where it had all unfolded still buzzed with energy. Even as the black SUVs drove away with Maya and her father, inside the crowd lingered, their voices mixing with the hum of livestream notifications and the constant flashes of cameras. People couldn't stop talking about what they had just witnessed. The videos spread across social media like wildfire. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation appeared on countless screens. Hashtags trended worldwide. "Our Delta Force Commander," "A Justice for Maya," "Cops Exposed." Millions of people watched in real time as the two officers knelt in shame, as Colonel Harass's words cut deep into the heart of corruption, and as a young girl stood tall beside her father. By dawn, the story had reached every major news outlet. Headlines screamed across the internet. "Cops harass teen girl, didn't know her father was Delta Force legend." "Colonel Harass delivers street justice." "Power, Fear, and Redemption, the viral video changing America." Maya sat quietly in the backseat of the SUV, her father beside her, his arm resting gently across her shoulders. She leaned against him, her body finally relaxing after the chaos of the day. The soldiers sat in silence, their eyes scanning the roads, their discipline unshaken. "Daddy," Maya whispered, her voice soft but steady. "The whole world saw it, didn't they?" Harass looked down at her, his stern face softening for her alone. "Yes, sweetheart, they did." "Then maybe it wasn't just about me." Her words sank into him. He studied her face, proud of the strength she showed even after everything she endured. She wasn't just his daughter anymore, she had become a symbol. By the time they reached home, reporters were already gathered outside, cameras flashing, voices shouting for answers. Harass guided Maya inside with his soldiers forming a shield around them. He didn't speak to the press. Not yet. His priority was his daughter. Inside, Maya sat at the kitchen table, staring at her scattered notebooks her father's men had carefully collected from the street. Some pages were torn, some smeared with dirt, but they were hers again. She touched them gently, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I thought they took everything from me," she whispered. Harass placed a strong hand on hers. "They tried, but you stood tall. You didn't let them break you. That's something they could never take." The following days were a storm. The police department scrambled to contain the damage. The two officers were suspended immediately, pending investigation. Protests broke out across the city, fueled by the video, calling for deeper reform, calling for justice beyond two men. Politicians spoke on television, activists rallied, and ordinary people carried signs with Maya's face printed on them. Everywhere she looked online, Maya saw herself. Some called her brave, others called her a hero. But she didn't feel like either. She was just a girl who wanted to walk home in peace, and yet now she carried the weight of a movement. Her father noticed the burden in her eyes. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, he spoke quietly. "Maya, I've fought wars across the world. I've seen enemies fall, and I've seen innocent lives saved. But nothing has ever made me prouder than seeing you stand your ground." Maya blinked away tears. "I wasn't brave, Daddy, I was scared." Harass smiled faintly. "That's what bravery is, sweetheart. Being scared, but standing anyway." The world didn't forget. The video remained one of the most watched clips of the year. Documentaries covered the event. Experts debated it on panels. But beyond the noise, the heart of the story remained clear. A girl had been harassed, and her father, a man whose name carried fear and respect, had turned that injustice into a lesson for the world. The officers never returned to duty. Their careers ended in disgrace, their faces forever tied to the moment they knelt in the street, stripped of arrogance. Some said it was too harsh. Others said it wasn't enough. But no one denied the impact. As for Colonel Harass, he returned to his duties quietly, refusing interviews, declining praise. To him, it wasn't about being a hero. It was about being a father. And Maya? She changed. She walked taller now, not because of the fame, not because of the cameras, but because she understood her worth. She understood that even in the face of humiliation, even when the world tried to break her, she had strength inside her that no one could take. Months later, when the noise had settled, Maya found herself walking the same street where it had all begun. The bakery still smelled of fresh bread. Children still laughed on the corner. Cars still rolled by. But this time, when she passed by, people smiled at her, nodded in respect, whispered her name. She smiled back, her heart lighter than before. The pain of that day would never fully vanish, but it had become something greater. A story, a lesson, a warning to those who abused power. Because everyone remembered what Colonel Harass said. Power is not about fear. Power is about protection. And from that day forward, no one ever looked at Maya the same way again. The ordinary girl who had once been humiliated was now a symbol of resilience. The daughter of the most feared Delta Force commander had shown the world that justice was not about rank or weapons or uniforms. It was about standing up even when you are afraid, and the world would never forget it.